The day he betrayed me is the day I was reborn. It sounds dramatic, doesn't it? But I don't have any other way to describe it. The heartbreak, the overwhelming pain, it all became a catalyst for change. A moment that should have crushed me, a moment that I thought would break me beyond repair, was the very moment that allowed me to start anew. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the culmination of everything that had happened before. The gaslighting, the lies, the promises broken again and again. I had given everything to him. My love, my trust, my loyalty. I had sacrificed my own happiness, my own goals, my own desires, all in the name of a relationship that wasn't real. I had been blind, believing that love meant compromising who I was, putting my needs aside for someone else's. And I had let it go on for far too long. But in that moment, when he looked at me with cold eyes and told me it was over, not because he didn't love me, but because he had found someone else, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Instead, I felt a deep, still calm wash over me. And for the first time, I realized that I had been living for someone else for far too long. I had been seeking his approval, his love, his validation, forgetting the most important thing of all. I was enough on my own. The pain of his betrayal was real, of course. I wouldn't pretend that it didn't hurt. But as I stood there, facing the reality of what had happened, I knew something had changed within me. I wasn't going to chase him. I wasn't going to chase anyone's love again. Not because I didn't believe in love, but because I had finally learned that my love for myself had to come first. I had spent so many years trying to make him see me, trying to make him love me in the way I wanted him to. I had been desperate for someone else to fill the emptiness inside me, for someone to tell me I was worthy of love. And in the process, I had lost myself. I had allowed my self-worth to be determined by his actions, by his moods, by the moments when he decided I was enough. But no more. The day he chose someone else over me was the day I chose myself. I remember walking away from him, my heart heavy, but my mind clearer than it had ever been. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was reclaiming my power. I wasn't going to waste another second chasing a love that wasn't meant for me. I wasn't going to be the person who begged for affection anymore. I was going to become someone who loved herself, someone who didn't need anyone else's approval to feel valuable. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to allow myself to sink back into the darkness that had once threatened to consume me. I knew that the path ahead would be hard, but I also knew that it was my path to walk. No one could walk it for me. And so, I chose myself. I chose to rebuild. I chose to focus on my dreams, on my passions, on the things that made me feel whole. I didn't know exactly what my future would look like, but for the first time, I felt excited by it. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone. I had everything I needed inside me. The woman I was before was gone. I had shed that version of myself like an old skin, and now I was ready to start fresh. The journey to becoming the person I was meant to be wasn't going to be easy, but it would be worth every single step. I was no longer running toward someone else's love. I was running toward my own success, toward a life that was mine to create, mine to control. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all, choosing myself. I had always been told that love would make everything easier, that if you found the right person, everything would fall into place. So when I met him, I believed every word. He was charming, attentive, and everything I had ever dreamed of. In the beginning, it felt like a fairy tale. He made me feel special, like I was the one he had been waiting for his entire life. I thought I had found the love I had always wanted, the one that would complete me. But, like all fairy tales, reality began to set in. Slowly, Imperceptibly at first, he started pulling away. I couldn't see it then, but looking back, it was all there. Little signs, little moments when I should have questioned things. But I was too in love, too hopeful to see what was happening. I convinced myself that everything was fine. He was just busy, or maybe it was just a rough patch. I told myself we'd get through it, like any couple would. But that's the thing about being in love with someone who doesn't love you in the same way. It's easy to overlook the cracks. I spent so much of my time trying to make him happy, trying to fix things that weren't even broken in the first place. I put him first in everything, always trying to prove my worth, my devotion, to show him that I was worthy of his love. The more I tried, the less he seemed to care. And the more he pulled away, the more I clung to him, desperate not to let go. I can remember the first time he came home late without any explanation. I tried not to overreact, but my heart raced as I tried to understand why he was so distant. When I asked him, he told me I was being too dramatic, that I was overthinking things. And like a fool, I believed him. After all, he was my everything. Why would I question the one person who had promised to be by my side? But as time went on, the moments of distance became longer, the excuses more frequent. When I would reach out, when I would try to find some connection with him, he would pull back, saying he was too busy or needed space. I began to doubt myself. Was I not enough? Was I doing something wrong? Why was he distancing himself from me when all I ever wanted was to make him happy? It wasn't until one evening, when I found a message on his phone, that everything started to unravel. It wasn't the first time I had thought about snooping. In my gut, something had always felt off, but I had trusted him. I had trusted him more than I trusted myself. But when I saw the text messages, intimate, flirtatious, and completely foreign to me, I felt the world drop out from under me. He had been talking to someone else, a woman I didn't know, someone who seemed to be getting all the attention I had been longing for. The words on the screen stung, as if every moment of my life had led to this exact point. I confronted him immediately, my hands shaking, my voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't even try to defend himself. He didn't apologize. Instead, he looked at me with cold eyes, eyes that had once held so much affection, but now held only indifference. "You're overreacting," he said, dismissing my pain as if it were nothing. "It's just a phase. I'm not doing anything wrong. You're just being insecure." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All the love I had given him, all the moments I had cherished, suddenly felt worthless. It wasn't about the other woman, though I felt the weight of that betrayal. It was the way he dismissed me, the way he made me feel like I was the problem, that somehow I wasn't enough, never enough for him. It was like a gut punch, one I didn't see coming, but one I knew deep down had always been there. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because I didn't know how to let go. I stayed because I had convinced myself that love was supposed to hurt sometimes, that relationships weren't always perfect. But the more I stayed, the more I lost myself. The more I sacrificed my own happiness for his comfort, the more I disappeared. There were moments when I thought about leaving, when I thought about walking away from everything that had hurt me, but each time I stayed. I stayed because I was scared of being alone, of being without him. I was terrified of losing everything I had built, of being rejected and discarded, of facing the world without him by my side. And so, I continued to live in that toxic cycle, feeding the need for validation, always wondering what I could do to make him see me again, to make him love me the way I had always hoped. Then came the day when I found out he had been seeing someone else for months. The truth hit me like a freight train. I had been living a lie, and all this time I had been too blinded by my own need for love to see it. He had told me the affair was over, that it was a mistake. But the lies continued. The excuses. The gaslighting. He continued to paint himself as the victim, making me feel like I was the one at fault for being hurt, for being betrayed. It was a cruel game, and I had been the fool. I remember the day I finally left. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a tearful confrontation. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic. I packed my things, left behind the life I had built around him, and walked out the door. It wasn't because I wanted to, it was because I had no choice. I had given everything, and he had taken it all without a second thought. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I realized that I couldn't keep living for someone else. I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself to someone who would never appreciate me. The pain didn't end the moment I walked out that door. In fact, it only grew. But it was a different kind of pain. It wasn't the pain of betrayal anymore. It was the pain of shedding the person I had been, the person I had allowed him to make me. And as I walked away, I realized that I wasn't just leaving him behind. I was leaving the version of myself who had needed him. The version of myself who had been willing to sacrifice everything for love. And in doing so, I was reborn. I had chosen myself. The days following my decision to walk away from him were a blur of emotion and chaos. There was the pain of what I had lost, the life I had built around him, the dreams I had shared with him. And yet, beneath that pain was something new, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a spark of hope, a faint whisper telling me that I could rebuild, that I could create a life for myself that didn't depend on anyone else. I spent the first few days in a daze, unsure of what to do, where to go, how to start. My apartment felt empty, too quiet, like a shell that no longer held the person I had been. The weight of my old life was still pressing down on me, but I knew that it was only temporary. I knew that if I stayed there long enough, I would find the courage to move on. The first step was simple, but crucial. I needed to clear out the remnants of my old life. Every photograph, every letter, every reminder of him had to go. At first, I hesitated. It felt like erasing a part of my history, but I knew it was necessary. I had given him too much of my heart, too much of myself, and it was time to take it back. So I packed up all the memories and tossed them in the trash. It wasn't just the physical objects I was getting rid of, it was the emotional baggage. I was shedding the version of myself that had depended on him. Once I had cleared the space, I realized I had to clear my mind too. I had spent so long fixating on him, on what went wrong, on how he had treated me, that I had forgotten who I was outside of the relationship. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to focus on me. I didn't rush into a new routine immediately. I let myself sit in the discomfort, knowing that it was part of the process. I had to feel the pain, confront the emptiness, and acknowledge my anger. But slowly, I began to take small actions toward my healing. I started with my body. I knew that getting healthy was more than just physical. It was a way to reclaim my strength, to remind myself that I was in control. I hadn't cared for myself the way I should have in the past. The late nights, the stress, the emotional drain had all taken a toll. So, I committed to working out again. It wasn't easy at first. My body felt sluggish, heavy with the weight of my emotions, but each time I pushed myself, I felt a little lighter. The sweat, the exhaustion, the endorphins, they gave me something I hadn't realized I needed: release. But my transformation wasn't just about physical strength. It was about mental resilience. I knew I needed to reframe the way I thought about myself, to stop seeing myself as a victim of his betrayal, and instead start seeing myself as someone capable of overcoming anything. I picked up books that inspired me. I started reading about successful people, about those who had rebuilt their lives after devastation. I pored over self-help books, motivational podcasts, and stories of people who had faced hardship and emerged stronger. I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to thrive. I wanted to prove to myself that I could be more than what I had been. I also turned to meditation and journaling. I had always dismissed the power of mindfulness, but I needed something to calm my mind. The constant replaying of what had happened was exhausting, and I knew I had to let go of the need for closure from him. I had to create my own peace. So I spent a few minutes each morning and night reflecting on my thoughts, writing down my feelings, and slowly learning to let go of the past. One of the hardest things I had to confront was my belief that I needed someone else to validate my worth. For so long, I had sought external approval, whether it was from Ethan, from friends, or from people around me. But I realized I had been seeking validation from the wrong places. I had never stopped to ask myself what I truly wanted, what made me happy. And that was where I started. I took up new hobbies, things I had always wanted to do but had put aside. I joined a painting class, rediscovered my love for writing, and began learning new skills. I threw myself into work, but not for the approval of others. I did it because I wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own. I wasn't doing it for him. I wasn't doing it for anyone but myself. As the weeks passed, I began to feel a shift in myself. The pain that had once consumed me no longer held the same power. I was still healing, still learning, but I felt more in control of my life than I ever had before. I no longer depended on anyone else's love or approval to feel worthy. I had found my worth again. I also started reestablishing boundaries with people who had enabled my toxic relationship dynamics. I distanced myself from friends who had constantly asked about Ethan or subtly suggested that I should move on by dating someone else. I didn't need to hear that. I needed time to focus on myself and build the foundation of my new life. I surrounded myself with people who respected my space and my journey. As I began to rebuild my career, I made a conscious decision to set clear professional goals, ones that weren't tied to anyone else's expectations but my own. I started making moves that took me out of my comfort zone, applying for new projects, seeking mentorship, and putting myself out there in ways I had never done before. The most important decision I made was to invest in my own happiness. I stopped waiting for someone else to make me happy. I stopped hoping that love would somehow fill the void. Instead, I learned that happiness was something I could create on my own. I could build the life I wanted, filled with purpose and joy, without waiting for anyone to validate it. The most significant shift, however, came when I stopped looking backward. I realized that my past no longer defined me. I didn't need to carry the weight of that broken relationship anymore. I had let go of the anger, the resentment, and the longing for what might have been. I had made a conscious decision to leave it behind and move forward. I had chosen myself, and that was the beginning of everything. Just when I thought I had left the past behind, it came crashing back into my life, threatening to unravel everything I had worked for. Ethan's shadow was long, and despite my best efforts to move forward, I couldn't escape the pull of his presence. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore, it was the consequences of his actions that continued to haunt me. The man who had broken my heart was now the same one who sought to sabotage everything I had built. It started subtly. He reached out to mutual friends, trying to paint me as the villain in the story. He made small, insidious comments about me to anyone who would listen, how I was unstable, how I had overreacted to everything that had happened. At first, I didn't notice. I was too focused on my own transformation, too wrapped up in the new life I was building. But slowly, whispers began to circulate. People who had once supported me were now questioning my decisions. Doubt crept in, and I found myself fighting an enemy I hadn't expected: the perception of others. The first confrontation came when I bumped into Sarah, a close friend from my old life, at a coffee shop. She had been one of the people who had supported me when I walked away from Ethan, or so I thought. But as we sat down to talk, I noticed her unease, the hesitation in her voice as she spoke. It didn't take long for me to realize that Ethan's influence had reached her too. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern, but there was something else in her eyes, something that made me question if she still believed in me. "I mean, maybe you overreacted a bit, don't you think? I've been talking to Ethan a lot and he seems really hurt. Maybe you should talk to him. Get closure, you know." A cold wave of shock washed over me. I had expected support, understanding, but here she was, questioning everything I had worked so hard to build. I wasn't the same person who had been willing to bend and give in to the opinions of others. I wasn't that woman anymore, the one who had been afraid of being alone, afraid of confrontation. "No," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I'm not going back to him, and I don't need closure from him. I've moved on. I'm choosing myself now, Sarah. You should know that." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought she might say something else, but she didn't. Instead, she looked at me like she didn't fully understand the strength I had found. It was in that moment that I realized something important. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had learned to trust myself, and that was enough. But that encounter, though uncomfortable, was just the beginning. Ethan didn't stop there. His campaign to discredit me grew more aggressive. He began sending messages, innocuous at first, but each one more manipulative than the last. "I miss you," he would write. "You were everything I wanted. It's not too late to fix things." I couldn't help but feel the familiar pang of longing when I saw those words. It would have been easy to give in, to let him back into my life, to fall back into the old patterns. But I had to remind myself that this wasn't about him anymore. This was about me, my life, my future. I had worked too hard to get to this point to let him back in, to let him pull me down again. His words weren't genuine. They were just another attempt to control me, to keep me tethered to a version of myself that was weak, dependent, and afraid. I ignored him. I deleted the messages. And yet, the attacks kept coming. He spread rumors. He reached out to people who had once been part of my world, twisting the narrative in his favor. He even started showing up at my workplace, trying to manipulate my colleagues into thinking I was unstable. He tried to destroy my reputation, to make me feel like I was the one who was in the wrong. The pressure started to build, and for the first time since I'd left him, I felt the weight of doubt creep in. Was I really in the right? Was I making the right choices? Maybe it was easier to fall back into the comfort of the past. Maybe it was easier to let him back in and let things return to the way they were. But deep down, I knew better. I had walked away for a reason. The turning point came when I received a phone call from a mutual acquaintance, someone who had always been neutral in our conflict. "Ethan's trying to get back into your life," she said, her voice tight with concern. "He's not going to stop, you know. He's telling everyone that you're the one who pushed him away, that you're the one who can't let go. He's playing the victim, and now people are starting to believe him." That's when I realized that this wasn't just a battle for control. It was a battle for my own peace of mind. I had fought too hard to regain my strength, my independence, my dignity. And I wasn't about to let him take that from me. But it wasn't going to be easy. Ethan was persistent, and his manipulation tactics were sharp. He knew how to push my buttons, how to make me question my decisions. I felt the weight of his presence in every corner of my life, whether it was at work, through mutual friends, or in the quiet moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice. That's when I realized something critical. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about me taking back control of my own life, taking responsibility for my own happiness. It wasn't enough to simply walk away from him. I had to stand up to him, to show the world, and myself, that I was stronger than he could ever be. I wasn't going to let his lies define me. I wasn't going to let his manipulation dictate my future. So, I decided to take action. I started documenting everything, every message, every attempt to manipulate me, every conversation where he tried to gaslight me. I consulted with a lawyer and made sure that I had the legal grounds to protect myself. I reached out to my friends and colleagues, explaining the truth of the situation and making sure they understood the impact of his actions. The first real confrontation came when I saw Ethan face to face at a mutual friends gathering. The tension in the room was palpable. I could feel his eyes on me, but I wasn't going to back down. I walked up to him, my heart pounding, but my resolve unshakable. "I'm done with you," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "And I'm not going to let you continue this game, not anymore." For a moment, he looked stunned. He had expected me to be weak, to be caught in the web of his lies, but I wasn't that person anymore. He had underestimated me. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," I continued, the words empowering me as I spoke. "You're the one who needs to change, not me." The confrontation ended with him walking away, defeated. I had won. It wasn't just about the battle between us. It was about the battle I had won with myself. I had reclaimed my power, my peace, and my future. And for the first time, I knew that no matter what he did, I would be okay. I had chosen myself. And in that choice, I had found my strength. The days following my confrontation with Ethan felt like the first moments of real freedom I had experienced in years. There was a clarity in my mind, an undeniable calm that washed over me as I realized that the battle I had fought wasn't just against him. It was against the version of myself who had allowed him to control me. And in that moment, I understood something that I had never fully grasped before. The person I had become was unstoppable. But even though I had made the choice to let go, the repercussions of Ethan's manipulation weren't over yet. I knew that the stakes had only risen, that the consequences of his actions weren't finished. The people who had once doubted me were still in the background, whispering his side of the story. The social web he had built around himself was designed to entangle anyone who dared challenge him. And yet, I realized that I didn't need to justify my actions. The truth of who I was, who I had become, was louder than any rumor. What struck me most was the sudden recognition that my peace didn't require Ethan's acknowledgement. I had spent so long waiting for an apology that would never come, for some validation from the man who had betrayed me, but I had stopped waiting. The apology wasn't coming, and I didn't need it anymore. I had grown beyond the need for closure. The only closure I needed was the one I had given myself when I chose to walk away. The changes were evident almost immediately. As the noise of his lies began to quiet down, I felt the space I had created for myself fill with the things that truly mattered. My work, my passions, my goals. Those were the things that became the foundation for my life now. I threw myself into my career, pushing myself harder than I had ever done before. I had spent so much time relying on someone else's love, believing that my success would mean nothing without someone else's support. But now, I was building something solely for me. I took charge of projects. I made decisions. And I took risks. I felt the power of my own choices, the weight of my own voice. And it wasn't just about professional success. It was about reclaiming everything that had once been taken from me. My happiness, my joy, my sense of self. Those were things that belonged to me, and I wasn't about to give them up for anyone else. I began to enjoy the small moments again, the walks in the park, the quiet evenings with a good book, the late-night phone calls with friends who truly saw me. I was no longer afraid to take time for myself. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. One of the biggest changes came in how I viewed the world around me. Before, I had been so fixated on the idea of love as something that would complete me. I had believed that love was the answer to everything, that it would fix all my broken pieces. But now I saw love differently. I had come to understand that love wasn't something I had to chase, it was something I had to give to myself first. I was no longer waiting for someone else to fill the empty spaces inside me. I was filling them myself. As I moved through the weeks, I found myself reconnecting with the people who truly cared about me, the ones who had stood by my side when I walked away from the chaos. These people didn't need me to explain myself or justify my actions. They understood. And the more I nurtured those relationships, the more I realized how much stronger I had become in their support. These were the relationships I had ignored in the past, too focused on someone who had never been worthy of my attention. I reached out to family members, to friends, to those I had pushed away while I had been consumed by the toxic relationship. I didn't owe them any explanations, but I wanted to show them the woman I had become, the one who no longer feared standing up for herself, who had learned to take her place in the world without hesitation. But it wasn't just the people I had reconnected with, it was also the people I had helped, the ones who were inspired by my story. I began mentoring younger professionals in my industry, sharing my journey with them. I had been so afraid of failure, of making the wrong decisions, of showing weakness, but I realized that my story, my pain, my mistakes, and my triumphs was something I could use to empower others. The more I helped them, the more I understood that my own struggles were not in vain. Every setback, every heartbreak had led me to a place where I could use my experience to lift others up. The biggest moment of change came when I finally looked at Ethan again, not through the lens of betrayal, but through the lens of understanding. He had been a part of my past, a chapter that had ended, and I no longer held on to the anger that once consumed me. I had forgiven him, but not for his sake, for mine. I had let go of the need to carry the burden of his actions. I had accepted that he was who he was, and that nothing I did could change him. The only thing I could change was how I allowed his actions to affect me. I stopped looking backward. The lies he had told, the manipulation, the hurt. Those were all part of a past that no longer had a hold on me. I realized that I was no longer defined by what he had done to me. I was defined by the choices I had made to better myself, to reclaim my power. And I knew that the future I was building was something no one could take from me. The final moment of closure came when I stood at the top of my professional game. I had made it, despite everything that had tried to bring me down. Ethan's presence, his lies, his manipulation, they no longer had the power to affect my future. I had surpassed the limitations I had once placed on myself. The woman who had once been lost in a toxic relationship was now a leader, an inspiration, and most importantly, a woman who had found peace within herself. I had achieved what I once thought was impossible, not just success, but the quiet, powerful knowledge that I was enough. I had chosen myself, and in doing so, I had found my true worth. The life I had rebuilt was one I could never have imagined when I was caught in the web of my past. The days of chasing validation, of waiting for someone else to affirm my worth, were behind me. Every morning when I woke up, I was no longer filled with doubt or regret. Instead, I felt a quiet, profound sense of peace that I had never known before. I had done it. I had truly chosen myself, and in doing so, I had built a life that was all my own. What struck me most was how everything in my life had fallen into place when I stopped trying to force it. It wasn't that I had no struggles. Life is never without challenges. But when I stopped looking for happiness outside of myself, it came naturally. The career I had once dreamt of was thriving. The relationships I nurtured were based on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. And most importantly, I had found a deep and unwavering love for the woman I had become. It hadn't been easy. There were days when the memories of him, of the lies, the betrayal, and the heartbreak still came rushing back. But I had learned how to deal with them. I had learned how to sit with my pain, acknowledge it, and then let it go. I had stopped running from my emotions. I had stopped letting them control me. One of the things I had realized in the aftermath of everything that had happened was that true success doesn't just come from what you achieve, it comes from what you overcome. Every setback, every failure, every moment of doubt had been a part of my growth, and each one of those experiences had taught me something invaluable, that I was capable of more than I ever thought possible. My business continued to flourish. I had taken risks that paid off, and I now had a team of people who believed in my vision and my leadership. I had transitioned from simply surviving to truly thriving, and I felt a sense of accomplishment that was deeply fulfilling. But it wasn't just the external success that brought me peace. It was the internal transformation. The quiet knowing that I no longer needed anyone's approval to feel worthy. I started to reflect more on the importance of self-love. I had always heard about it, of course, but it wasn't until I walked this path that I truly understood its power. Self-love isn't about selfishness. It's about acknowledging your worth, not because someone else tells you that you are enough, but because you know it within yourself. It's about forgiving yourself for your past mistakes and recognizing that those mistakes don't define you. They shape you, but they don't control you. As I continued on my journey, I felt the space around me become filled with more positive energy. I had become more attuned to my own needs, my own desires, and I no longer feared the idea of being alone. Being alone didn't mean being lonely. It meant I was whole within myself. I had come to value solitude, knowing that it was in those quiet moments where I truly reconnected with who I was and what I wanted. Romance, too, came into my life again, but this time, it wasn't about filling a void. It wasn't about needing someone else to complete me. It was about finding someone who respected me for who I was, someone who saw the depth of my growth and embraced it. It wasn't a fairy tale love. It was grounded, real, and it came from a place of mutual understanding and growth. I had learned that love is not about dependency. It's about partnership, standing side by side, supporting each other's dreams, and creating something together that enhances both lives. But even though I had embraced the idea of love again, it was never my focus. It had never been my focus. I was creating a life that I could be proud of, one that was built on my terms. The idea of love was no longer about finding someone to complete me. It was about adding to my life, not filling a void. The most important change I had made, though, was in my perspective on failure. I had feared it so much in the past, afraid that if I failed, it would mean I wasn't enough. But now I saw failure as simply a part of the journey, a lesson. The idea that we must always succeed, that we must always be perfect, is a lie we tell ourselves. We grow from the moments when we stumble, from the moments when we have to pick ourselves up and try again. And that, I now understood, was where true strength lies. It had been a long road, but I had reached a point where I could say that I was truly happy with who I had become. I had faced my deepest fears, my darkest moments, and had come out stronger on the other side. Ethan's betrayal, painful as it was, had been the turning point that led me here. Without it, I might never have understood the power I had within me. I might never have realized that I didn't need anyone to validate my worth, that I could create my own future without relying on anyone else. As I sat back and looked at everything I had built, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I was grateful for the pain, for the lessons, and most importantly, for the woman I had become. And even though my journey wasn't over, I felt confident in the fact that I could face whatever came next, because I was no longer running from my past. I had embraced it, learned from it, and moved forward. And so, I continue to walk this path, knowing that my journey is mine alone. I am no longer defined by what happened to me, but by how I chose to rise above it. The woman who once lived in the shadow of someone else's love is now living a life built on self-respect, self-love, and self-worth. And no matter what the future holds, I know one thing for sure. I will continue to choose myself.